Hello, hello. All right, thank you for having me here tonight.
Of course. Well, we're all very interested. So tell us a little bit about your project.
Well,
For my independent study, I wrote the first draft of a novel I've named The Apprentice. And The Apprentice, in its accompanying critical introduction, focused on gender in the fantasy genre. Specifically, the focus on the gender binary and how it affects and holds up patriarchal values, be it through a binarized magic system as seen in The Wheel of Time, party composition as seen in The Lord of the Rings. There are 9 men and only 11 women within the entire book series. And as well, male power fantasies as seen in Dune with Paul and the Bene Gesserit.
oh, and yeah, so essentially, that's kind of it.
Incredible. So tell us a little bit about your plot.
All right, well, with
The Apprentice follows a young blacksmith who is struggling to find their place. They have no upward mobility and are stuck on one of the farthest satellite colonies of the Consensus. They're plagued by dreams and nightmares of old memories of which they try to escape from in their work. But their work is no reprieve as their forge mate looks upon them with resentment. Prince's lack of identity hampers their progress within the story. They aren't able to make a name for themselves, and they won't willingly take a name to define their work by. That is until specters from their past rear their silvered heads, bringing with them troubles and surprising aid. Slowly but surely, Prince claims an identity and is pulled into the fantasy story of a stuck quest fantasy. Budding magic arises, learning of their new skills, and they find themselves in the hero role, and try not to lose themselves to an identity that is not their own.
Well, we all find this very intriguing, but we really want to know, how does this all connect to your critical introduction?
well, I'm very glad you asked. So essentially,
My critical intro focuses a lot on how gender functions in quest fantasy, and I wanted to play with these ideas and its conventions. In The Wheel of Time and The Lord of the Rings, each character has a pre-established idea of who they are. Frodo's a Baggins. He knows his gender and where he has come from. Rand thinks he knows who he is until his world is shook by the words spoken by his father while he's sick. Despite this, he still has the basics, a name, a gender, and a clear goal in the outside world. Prince has none of these things. They have no name, they do not identify with the gender they present. They do not have a clear goal, simply to work until they get good enough possibly to leave Alucinia, but that's a far-reaching goal. Their life is one of painful stagnation. The real fantasy story does not begin until chapter 12, where they accept their identity and the call to adventure. Throughout the first 1 to 11 chapters, the calls to adventure come and they get ignored and ignored and ignored until finally they are able to take that call. The stuck quest fantasy begins here, remaining rooted in the town until finally the last chapter they're able to pick a name and finally establish their goal. The story progress itself is hampered by Prince's own progress with identity, and it's slow at first, letting the readers into the fact that this has been a long time coming. It's a long time getting to the point where they really do pick their identity. Reading for you chapter 12 of The Apprentice right now. In this chapter, Prince and their friends are using their free time during the melt, the springtime melting of snow from their eastern village, and they go adventure into the East Wood. Throughout the story, Prince ignores their reflections, and in the reflections of a still pond, they confront themselves, and they grapple with their identity, pulling it from the depth of the lake like King Arthur with Excalibur. Please enjoy Chapter 12 of The Apprentice. Excerpt from Chapter 12 of The Apprentice. Reflections in a Still Pond. Before the pair, Ulladen and Grail set down their bags on the body of a fallen tree, the trunk dipping into the pond before them. The surface of the pond was pristine, clear as glass, still as ice. Its bottom looked to be sand and clay, as the water dipped deeper. Small fish and skimmers flitted amongst its shallow depths, most obscured by the light of the sun which streamed in through the break in the trees above, giving the surface a mirror-like quality. Prince set down Elaine slowly as they both stared across the lake, a family of deer staring back at them. An odd sight, not in that it was a family, but that they lacked the extraneous limbs and extra faces or odd growths of horns. They were exceptionally normal. Yet that normalcy was special. Just like that morning months ago, both wondered if it was the same family. Grail motioned to the pair to come closer. Some deer were drinking from the bank, and others waded through the little stream that fed into the pond from an upward slant deeper into the forest. Grail smiled at the pair, and loudly whispered, "Surprise!" Prince looked to Elaine, their face lit up. Grail's mirroring the look of mistaking the relief present on both their faces as joy at the discovery of the surprise. "It's magnificent, Grail. It truly is," Elaine whispered back. Prince nodded wordlessly along. The sight even seemed to have wiped away Ulladen's dark mood. They all sat along the log, watching the spectacular sight of deer drinking from cold, clear water, talking only sparingly and in whispers to one another. Prince thought it all was funny. Each day their friends worked with the arcane, yet they seemed in awe of this sight. The arcane couldn't compare to the untouched nature of this place and the deer. It was safe from the dangers of the wastes, the east woods. It was no mire or fen that was wandered and picked over melt after melt. Warmth suffused the day as the adventuring party rested on the banks of the pond. The water was cold, yet Grail waded her way in, chasing a floating flowered pad across the water, when she finished scrabbling at the plants along the water's edge. Ludin watched her as she talked excitedly to no one in particular and stood in the center of the pond. Wading to her waist in nothing but small clothes. Prince and Elaine stood in the shallows, pants rolled to their knees, kicking up mud from their wriggling in the mudded clay, sinking them deeper into the bottom of the pond. As the ripple subsided and the mud settled back down from the water's surface, the clear stillness returned. Prince avoided staring back down into the calm, glass-like surface of the water, unrippled by Grail trying her best to surprise Uladin by tripping him. The coolness of the water seeped into Prince, an unconscious shiver running quickly across their skin, drawing goose-flesh for a moment. Prince's reflection stared back up at them, the one they ignored so often. Shimmering, the water's reflection became clearer, more visible. There was a slight tightening in their stomach and chest, a mixing lurching that came with laying eyes upon themselves as they stared downward, unable to resist. Be it in the mirrors in the Lyceum, water basins in the barracks, or the firelit metal, looking upon eyes were hers and not hers, theirs and not theirs. Eyes of shifting gray, striated with strands of color of a frigid river and that of summer leaves, vibrant and clear. Today they were gray, with no colors present but subdued, yet for a moment she couldn't help but think they were softer, beautifully balanced, monotoned gray. Black, ink-stained hair swept just above the eyes, combed backwards with fingers to fall to their shoulders, keeping out of their face. Dark ink hiding the blonde that lay beneath it, blending with the other dark-haired curls of the east. Prince always hated the dark hair, especially when it rained or when rolling sweat brought soot and ink into their eyes. Despite the ink, their hair waved slightly, breaking from the forced curls of hardened soot and ink. She took in her face a caramel complexion, a sharp nose, and angular face, with high cheekbones. Their thin lips and the wrinkles already forming there from drawing of their brow. The apprentice looked down at themselves, and they looked back up into a confused face, confused by their own reflection, hurt by their own reflection, unmeaning harm in those deep gray eyes, disconnected but implicitly there, floating just behind the eyes, thoughts racing by that dissociative self. With her, she doesn't know anything, girl, doesn't even know her own name, a smith and their worth ethic. The apprentice, the apprentice, what is she? She, stop. They shouted in their head and the water rippled around them as if the sound vibrated out from them. Elaine, too busy watching a bird flit around her head, did not notice the water lapping against her leg. Still seeping the coolness, receded slightly as Prince took a breath, staring back at themselves. Enough was enough, the confusion made their bones ache. Focusing on the calming, the deep feeling in their chest, they retreated into thought. I don't fit, not in the ways I understand. If it's going to be this confusing without my say, death take me. Death burn it all. Nameless, faceless, no bearing on this. My face fits and it doesn't. My body fits and it doesn't. My name isn't even mine. Was death always death? It didn't matter. Scar death for all it matters. I'm me. That's all I'll ever be. Bone-deep ache faded away. The feeling in their chest lessened, the water jumping lightly until they looked away. What was that, Prince? Elaine turned her head slightly, not quite looking back at them. Perched on her shaking finger was a sickly spear nose. Its head turned quizzically, beak opening to warble at them before flying off. Turning, Elaine looked at them, bright-eyed, with a shine lighting up her face. They smiled and realized she had said what she had said, but before they could answer, she spoke again. You were mumbling something. Oh, nothing to worry about. Deflection jumped easily to their lips, to avoid and hide like they always did. When will it change? How will I change? It can wait. Just taking everything in here, they managed, a smile that they hoped was convincing. It's beyond compare. Putting her arms out, she spun around, freeing herself from the mud, rotating through the water, her cloak billowing and her pants unrolling ever closer to the water's surface. False smile or not, it grew genuine as Elaine spun dizzily, the sunlight through the trees brightening her pallid features, bringing unneeded light to her pale face. It only amplified her joy and beauty. Slowing from her spin, she wobbled, beginning to lean to the side. Prince moved quickly to steady her, instead nearly knocking her over as they tripped forward, feet still inches deep in clayed mud. Managed to keep Elaine from toppling herself, they tried to steady themselves, but the momentum carried them forward. They let go of Elaine's shoulder, falling forward into the water with a great splash and a water-garbled yelp. Despite the shallows, the water still covered their head as Prince crashed against the bottom of the pond. It was only a few seconds, but the time at the bottom felt like ages. Time stretched on, the coolness of the pond, laying on the bottom, looking out. Seeing the wobbling reflections of Elaine as she leaned down to offer her hand, the thin beams of light that permeated the surface all the way through the cloud of black ink and soot floating off their hair, clouding their view of Elaine, the world, the off reflection of them against the surface of the water. It blocked them, the cloud around their head, the stained part of themselves, washing away as Elaine's hand clasped theirs and pulled them to the surface. Sound returned to the world in the form of water draining and Elaine's breathless laughter as she tried to vainly pull Prince up. She barely could form words as Prince pushed her out of their face. I tried to catch you, she managed, hands on knees, trying to draw full breaths as Prince brought themselves up, wiping away running rivulets of water-drawn ink from their eyes. Calming her laughter, her eyes widened as she saw the running ink. Oh, death. Her brow crinkled as her mind began to work up a solution to recolor it before returning to Alucinia. Smiling, Prince shook their head. I think I'll keep it like this. Enough hiding it, right? I am who I am. Elaine's worried face melted into a soft smile as she nodded in agreement. There's something else, I think. They knew what they needed to be said. They knew Elaine would still feel the same way. She had to. Did she? Would she? She couldn't cast me away for something this simple, complex. The two words overlapped in their thoughts, ricocheting off each other, twisting Prince's tongue into knots with a simple request. Or was it a demand? A need? She had to understand. She had to. Prince, are you okay? The soft smile faded back into concern. Emotions must have been warring across their face. Head spinning, thin needle points pricked across their skin, replacing the comfortable warmth that seeped into them since they dipped beneath the water. That grimy feeling returned to their skin as they started to bite back the words. Mouth open and closing, they tried to make the words and swallowed harshly, taking a deep breath, driving back the spiking across their skin, gripping the warmth as if it were physical. They straightened their back and looked to Elaine. It's something Asriel said that stuck with me. Searching for the words, they ran their hand through still wet hair. Something in it. Shaking their head, Prince pivoted. I've always said I never felt like I fit, be it with the others in the orphanage and with the Smiths. Elaine nodded again, the concern easing on her face. It's the way people have addressed me, among other things. When I'm with you all, you only use my name, but when others refer to me, it just feels off. That icy needle point began building, running up along their spine. They shoved it down hard, fist woven with heat strangling it. When everyone refers to me as she, Elaine's brow knit together, but she listened and made no move to speak, praised death. I'm okay with it, more than the others, but well, they were losing the point under her dark-eyed gaze. Asriel said something different, something more right, if that's the right word. Like the first key turning in a puzzle box, or a step out of the carriage ruts, Elaine added softly to Prince's nod. Exactly. Asriel referred to me as they. I don't know what the difference is other than it doesn't highlight... Elaine's brow was still furrowed and their heart sank. None of this makes sense, does it? In ways yes, in ways no's. Prince, I know you. This is one of the first times I've seen you without your forehead wrinkled and trying to puzzle out who you are. I don't need to understand it, only know that it is what makes you feel yourself. Laughing brightly, she added, I'm happy that you unlocked that first lock. Surprised by her laughter, their brow furrowed, yet hopeful notes entered their voice. You won't think any differently of me? Differently? Prince, no. Reaching over, she took their hand in hers, easing their clenched fingers open with her own. You are who you are. I have no say in that as much as I do speak on it. Redness climbed into her cheeks. I want you to be happy. This is something you need. Why would I think any different? Prince shrugged and smiled. Just a fear, irrational as it is. I should have realized I won't be able to shake you loose. Letting out an exasperated breath, shoulders slumping, she dropped Prince's hand and pointed at their chest. Much to ruin every serious conversation we have, there doesn't always have to be levity. Huffing a suppressed grin twitched at the corner of her mouth. You're stuck with me, Prince. You aren't going to shake me that easily, and if you think so, I'm going to throw you down in that water again. Again? I tripped trying to keep you from tripping. Laughing, they followed as she stalked her way out of the water, her pant leg unfolding into the rippling surface. Prince followed, laughing, Elaine keeping the smile on her face from showing as long as she could, neither noticing the thin string-like flows of water that radiated from Prince as they held that warm feeling in their heart.